Again, my name's Aaron Tooley. I'm joined by my colleague Francis Kellerman. We are...
We're on now.
Yeah, hear that. We're planners with Kendi Keys Collaborative. As Rob mentioned, we're from Sugarland, Texas, which is a little suburban community just outside of Houston. Francis and I live right downtown in Houston, actually. So we're very excited about presenting to you our first chapter of your comprehensive plan. Forgive me, we are not the only consultant on this project. We're joined by Smith, Seckman, and Reed, who will be doing all of our analyses as far as wastewater and potable water, and also Neil Schaefer, both their Nashville office and their Murfreesboro office will be working with us on drainage and stormwater issues. And Greg Judy is here from the Murfreesboro office of Neil Schaefer. They're working on the major transportation plan, the 2040 major transportation plan, that will be a complement to the comprehensive plan.
And sort of as Rob mentioned, we mainly want to kind of just go through some of the existing conditions with you. That was sort of the main point of Chapter 1, to sort of explain where Murfreesboro is with respect to the various chapters that we will go in depth with. So Aaron will sort of overview the different plan sections that we have, and then we hope to talk a little bit about Mind Mixer, give another plug for that, and then sort of just go through chapter by chapter and sort of describe some of the demographics that we've found and sort of how these inform future analyses that we have in place.
Great. Slide. Can we turn the mic down a little bit? So we're going to go review a lot of our findings from Chapter 1, Planning Context. This is the first chapter of a several chapter comprehensive plan. In January, as Rob had mentioned, I believe we'll be back January 26th to present Chapter 2, Growth, Capacity, and Infrastructure. In March, we'll be presenting our mobility chapter, the end of March, and actually the mobility chapter will be looking at multiple forms of mobility, transportation, not only vehicular, but what we call active transportation as well, with respect to pedestrian transportation and bicycle transportation. Later on in the year, we'll be presenting Chapter 4, Land Use and Character, followed by Housing and Neighborhoods, Parks, Recreation, and Natural Resources, Economic Development, and then finally the last chapter will be our implementation chapter. How do we take all of these somewhat perhaps lofty strategies and recommendations and really start to make them policies and make the plan policy driven? We'll be working with you. That will be when we develop or facilitate a third community workshop where we'll be prioritizing all of the plan's recommendations. We will also be producing at that point an executive summary, which will be a standalone document that will summarize, it'll be basically about a 30-page brief that will summarize the whole comprehensive plan in its entirety, and that will be for mass distribution to prospective companies coming to Murfreesboro as well as others. A number of the supplemental deliverables that we'll be producing along the way. In January, we're going to be presenting to you a land development code critique. We're going to be looking at your city's code of ordinances, your zoning districts, and offering some recommendations on how those might be streamlined, but also some of the strengths of your land development codes. With each chapter, we're going to be presenting to you a series of guiding principles, and this will not be necessarily what we're going to be doing, but how we're going to be looking at the information, considering that, evaluating the information, and making subsequent recommendations. Chapter 2 will be informed by a cursory capital facilities analysis, where we're going to be looking at other public facilities other than your utilities infrastructure. And then finally, as I mentioned, with Greg's help, with Neil Schaefer, we're developing a major transportation plan for that looks out to 2040. This is just a quick image of the base map that we're using that shows essentially the planning area, where the white in the center, of course, is the city limits of Murfreesboro, and then the dark gray area is your city's urban growth boundary. This is the area within which we're considering, with the city limits, to be our planning area. So yeah, this is going to be there's going to be a very robust kind of geographic information system based series of maps. All of the maps, the analytical maps, will be based on this base map. With respect to community engagement, going into this, the mayor and city manager were very interested that this was had a very strong public engagement component, that this was driven by you all, the public. And so we developed what we call a high-touch approach that has to do with a series of meetings, as well as a high-tech approach, and that we're considering different online activities, press releases, and the like. So today, actually, we had our third of 5 listening sessions. Greg, this afternoon, facilitated a transportation-related listening session, which was very interesting. We've had 2 previous listening sessions involving your real estate development community, developers, realtors, as well as a listening session with landscape architects, engineers, architects, mainly those on the other side of the equation who are responsible for building your buildings. As Rob had mentioned, we do have a very strong task force. Our task force is composed of a series of, or several residents from your community, and they are the first line of review with regard to what we are proposing, whether it's viable, whether it'll pass muster, whether it's relevant to your community. So we're going to be having 8 comprehensive plan task force meetings. We had the second one last night. We'll also be conducting 2 joint workshops. This will be with your planning commission and with your city council, where we will be briefing them on plan recommendations, where we are in the whole planning process. We had one at the start of this whole program, and then we'll also be doing a midpoint briefing with your planning commission and city council. As Rob had mentioned earlier, and I'm sure many of you all attended, our first community workshop, it was very well attended. We had over 200 members of the community attend that presentation, and it was basically launching the whole comprehensive planning process. As Rob had mentioned, we will be having a second community workshop toward the end of March, where we'll be presenting the Chapter 3 mobility and going through another series of exercises. And then the last community workshop will be when we go through the whole plan implementation process and prioritization process. We'll also be, every time we're here, we're going to be making community outreach presentations. This is one of those such presentations, but we're also going to be looking at other organizations like your Chamber of Commerce, maybe other clubs or professional organizations that we can get in front of to discuss the plan, our progress, and what they want to make sure is included within the plan. Finally, we're going to be making at the end of this whole planning process, we'll be presenting the plan to the Planning Commission, and there will be a public hearing then. The Planning Commission will be adopting that plan, but making the recommendation to the City Council where we'll then be making a presentation to council, and they will then officially adopt the comprehensive plan, hopefully. With respect to high-tech approaches to public engagement, Francis is going to talk a lot about our online discussion forum, where we're using a software program that many of you all might be familiar with, and I'm sure many of you all have been participating in this program, Mind Mixer, where we're basically posting 3 questions, I believe, every 3 weeks now. And so we're on our 6th, or I guess it's our 7th posting of questions, and we've received just an amazing response to the point where the actual company Mind Mixer is very interested in running an article on our success as far as how Murfreesboro has been using the program, and that will be nationally broadcast. We've also been we will be developing 17 e-newsletters that basically post the questions and when the questions are posted as well on Mind Mixer, as well as whenever we have other community events. With Mike Browning's help, we're also developing press releases throughout this planning process. And at the very end of this whole program, we will be developing a community survey which we'll be posting, and that will be going out community-wide. And then we're also doing all sorts of community advertising. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Francis to talk to you a little bit about Mind Mixer.
Thank you. Yes, as promised, another plug for Mind Mixer. I did this last night, but just to get a little interactive, could I have a show of hands of individuals who've been on the Mind Mixer site?
No. Wow.
Nice. So this is a pretty cool report that Mind Mixer runs essentially in the back end of the site. And it gives a synopsis of basically the traffic that the site has received. And as Aaron mentioned, it can be a challenge to, in this day and age, get people to focus on all of the different types of mobile, online types of, whether it's Twitter, Facebook. So Mind Mixer sort of taps into that network, but it can be a challenge to get people to actually focus on consistently participating in Mind Mixer. So Murfreesboro has been an incredible case of fairly consistent and high participation. And so what you can see in this report is that since we ran this last week, there have been about 9,000 hits. Basically, someone's logged into Murfreesboro2035.com and found Mind Mixer. It doesn't necessarily mean they got in. The 1,600 unique visitors sort of references those who've been in on the site. And then below, when you log into Mind Mixer, you create an account and you give them pretty rudimentary information about yourself, your name, your age, your sex, and in general, your zip code. So this is sort of an interesting graphic because it sort of characterizes the average participant, and it's just sort of interesting to see who on a daily basis or consistently is on Mind Mixer. So the next few slides are some additional reports that we have. This is sort of an example of for one question, sort of the breakdown of participants that we've had. It would be helpful to have the actual question, but anyway, this is sort of the cool stuff that we can do with Mind Mixer, and what this allows us is just to sort of understand who else in the community we're able to touch, whether it's people like you all who are either part of the city or are on the task force or are active community members, or potentially these are participants who can't, for whatever reason, attend the community workshop. So Mind Mixer has been a great tool for reaching out to a wide variety of participants in Murfreesboro. So the next few slides sort of just give a summary of some of the questions that we've asked, and since you all are the all-star participants, you already know the questions that we've asked, but you don't necessarily know the summary. So I was just going to go through a few, and this presentation will be up on the website, so if you're really interested to see sort of the overall response rate to some of these questions, we can reference that, but just in the interest of time, I'll just go over a few. Aaron and I both thought that the responses for the first question were really poignant, that a great deal of the respondents on the Mind Mixer site believe that your community is a unique standalone community, and that's really important because it leads us to dedicating the plan to crafting that current and future identity of the community. Again, some of these other questions are tapping into specific improvements, which is important. That helps us to know, because Aaron and I don't live here, and fortunately we have a great staff of, a great group of sub-consultants who are here and they know your community, but you all know your community best, and we really appreciate the input that we get. Shannon, if you could go, I think 2 more slides. Yes. So this is an example of a question that I think is really important because it helps you all to think about some of the positive things that Murfreesboro has done currently. I think we come in a lot of the times and ask, what are your issues? What is the city not doing right? Where do you need help? And while that is important and constructive, what is really helpful too, I think, is you all reflecting on why you all want to live here, why you choose to live here, and what allows you to stay. So through the course of our Mind Mixer time, we hope to also ask some positive questions and to continue you all getting invested in your community. Yeah, so these are, again, just sort of the summary of questions that we've had, and if you're interested after, we'd totally love to talk about it, but just so we can get through some of the other meaty stuff we have in the presentation, we can keep moving through. And just a plug, we do have some current questions on the site. I believe they end soon, so if you guys are itching to get some responses in there, you may want to do that soon. And these are those questions. So anyway, I'll turn it back over to Aaron and I'll jump back in.
Good.
So,
Thank you. We have 2 computers going on here. So, as I mentioned earlier, each chapter will be informed by a series of guiding principles that will be reviewed by your task force and approved. And it will be through these lenses that we will be crafting these various chapters. So just to provide you with an example, these first 4 principles kind of guided how we're going to approach this entire planning program. The first principle, participation and inclusiveness. Encourage broad citizen participation to benefit from the knowledge, insights, and support from all local residents. Create a community where people from all backgrounds, cultures, and income levels feel included and welcomed. I think we can all agree that this is an important principle for a lot of the things that we do.
Well, and another plug for that, and Rob mentioned this in his opening, was this is y'all's plan. We want the community engagement because we want to make sure that what we're producing is consistent with what you all want. And we had this talk with the task force, and we want the feedback. We want to know if we are, hitting it square on the nose, or if, we missed the mark. So at the end of the day, when we finish the plan, we leave and we go back to Houston, but we leave you with a document that we want you all to use. So that's part of the reason for really actually needing the engagement is you all are like the metronome for where this plan hits, and your ownership of that plan is really important. So that's actually like a functional basis of the community engagement portion as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is an 18-month planning program from here on out or so, something like that, 17 months. This is the easy part, developing the plan. The hard part is going to be implementing the plan over the next 20 years. You're going to be seeing a whole lot of different growth and changes to your community, and hopefully this plan will provide a a guide, but also a yardstick for measuring your progress as you implement the strategies and recommendations that are going to be embodied in this comprehensive plan. This is a policy document. It's not something that's going to have, it's not meant to be regulatory, it's meant to develop policies. From this plan, though, and one of our recommendations will be to then look at your code of ordinances and think about how that your code of ordinances and land development regulations, your design guidelines, can be tweaked in order to help with the implementation of these recommendations. That's the whole plan. And when you think about also, just in conclusion to that conversation, when you think about all of the communities that you go to, like for vacation or places where you feel are really special communities, they're really special because people are working around the clock. I mean, it's a 24/7 kind of program to create the communities that you like to go to. They just don't happen. They take a whole lot of work, and it's not something that you can just rely on your public leaderships. It takes a whole community to pull this kind of stuff off. So principle 2, cooperation. Coordinate planning with school districts, community organizations, adjacent communities, county and regional government, and where possible, seek common solutions that are efficient and cost effective. So that's really important. I was speaking with Mr. Goodman earlier, and also Gary Anderson from City Schools. A great example of this is how City Schools and Parks and Recreation Department are working together to where public school grounds can also serve as community and neighborhood parks. This is a great example of public partnerships that can achieve certain synergies that will benefit your neighborhoods. Principle 3, responsibility. Accept responsibility for the health and quality of the community and avoid shifting costs to future generations. This is a pretty important one as well. We had this transportation-related listening session this morning, or this afternoon, and while we thought it was going to be mainly focused on vehicular transportation, new thoroughfares, all that kind of stuff, we talked a lot about, and former Mayor Bragg brought up some excellent points as far as how we need to be thinking about the health of your community and provide those kind of amenities that will ensure that you remain a healthy community.
I also think too, this principle challenges everyone to try to really think within that planning horizon. 20 years, that's a long time. And there are changes that will happen in that 20 years that may seem completely ridiculous right now, or completely unachievable right now. And I encourage everyone to kind of push themselves to really understand that planning horizon and imagine what you would like this place to be, and that's hard, but 20 years is a long time. So
it's a long time, but it's also like tomorrow. So a lot of this stuff, change is happening so fast, it seems like. But principle 4, design. Encourage great design and innovation. Identify ways that new development can respect the natural beauty and unique neighborhood identities that make Murfreesboro an attractive city. At the same time, look for ways to attract new industries, new businesses that can thrive in the community. So we're very pro-growth and development, but we want to make sure that we help you get the policies and then the codes in place to guide and direct development so that it is predictable development of high quality. That's our goal. So we're going to go over some interesting community profile elements. As we discussed with the task force and during the first community workshop, what we always do when we begin these planning programs is pick a series of comparison communities that are similar to Murfreesboro in some ways, demographically, maybe that they might have similar businesses or industry, or maybe they might be college towns, as in the case of Murfreesboro, or that might be somewhat aspirational, that have communities that have done things that might work well for Murfreesboro. So we identified a series of local communities in Tennessee, but also communities around basically the southeastern quadrant of the country that we believed were relevant. And we vetted these through the city administration as well as the task force. But so the communities that we've been looking at include Brentwood, Clarksville, Franklin, Hendersonville, Nashville, and Smyrna within Tennessee, and then Asheville, North Carolina, Athens, Georgia, Cary, North Carolina, Charlottesville, Virginia, Columbia, Missouri, Florence, Alabama, Greenville, South Carolina, and McKinney, Texas. A lot of these communities are growing as fast, if not faster, than Murfreesboro, but all of these communities have some similarity or characteristic that make them, as far as we're concerned, worthy of looking at to see what they've done and how we might learn from them. We're not here to reinvent the wheel. We're here to borrow some of the great things that other communities have done and test them on your city. We have Kendall Keys Collaborative. We are we're a very small planning firm. We're like 10 people, but we have a national planning orientation. So we're working all over the country, and hopefully we can bring to this planning program things that we've learned from other communities, things that have worked in some places that may or may not work with this city. With your city, excuse me.
Yeah, and the utility of some of these comparisons too is just giving some perspective to the data. In some cases, you'll see maybe Murfreesboro is maybe behind some comparison communities, but then in other cases, Murfreesboro, far exceeds some other ones. So it's helpful to have sort of that barometer to understand the numbers, because in a vacuum, they don't mean anything. So we use the comparison communities to sort of understand where Murfreesboro shapes up in existing conditions, and how that can help us understand needs for the future.
So just a bit about our data sources. We have been using of course, the information from the U.S. Census Bureau and the Census Bureau's American Community Survey. Regarding the American Community Survey, that is an element of the census that basically makes projections based on the previous census. So we used those two, but we also used ESRI's Business Analyst. ESRI is Environmental Systems Research Institute, and they're basically a geographic information system-based company. They produce the GIS software programs that I think the city uses, I'm sure. Most cities use ESRI GIS software, as do most planning firms use it as well. So that's basically where we're getting the information. When it comes to the demographic or population projections, we use a whole bunch more data sources, which we'll get into at that point. Oh, okay. Well, can we go back one slide really quick? So here, what I wanted to just point out was here are three figures there are 50 figures total within this chapter. These are three. With each figure, we're comparing Murfreesboro to the rest of the comparison community. So in this case, we're looking at the age of residents within Murfreesboro and the comparison communities, families, and seniors. So interestingly, as it says at the top, that we found that 33% of Murfreesboro, or 33% of Murfreesboro population is composed of families, mainly young families. Also, that 10% of Murfreesboro's population is composed of seniors, 65 and older. So that's an important demographic. We also realized that the median age is 30.7 years old, so you have a relatively young community, but based on the American Community Survey, between 2014 and 2019, the average or the median age of your resident population will increase from 30.7 years old to 32.1%. So you're maturing slowly as a community. Yes, sir. I was going to do that in the next one, but so essentially the chart is composed of these bar graphs. The blue stands for Murfreesboro. Murfreesboro is always on the top, but then the two green bars are represent the highs and the lows, and then the dashed vertical line represents just gives you a way of evaluating or analyzing where Murfreesboro is compared to the rest, or excuse me, where the rest of the communities are with respect to Murfreesboro. So hopefully that's legible for you through the course of this. But we encourage you to read the plan in its entirety, because we're only going to be going over a few of these figures. Income with respect to between 2014 and 2019, the median household income, Murfreesboro ranks 7th out of 15, which is pretty high. You're at 50,768. That's your dollars. That's your median household income. Interestingly, though, the American Community Survey suggests that Murfreesboro's income growth is expected to be lower than most of your most of the comparison communities, with the exception of the city of Smyrna. So we're not exactly sure why that is. Yes, ma'am.
Well, having worked for the U.S. Census Bureau myself as a manager, what I can tell you is that our numbers are skewed as a part of the diversity of the 24,000 cities. They all fit the number, they all fall in the 14,000 as well as the 15,000. So that definitely skews our numbers.
Okay, thank you very much. Did everybody hear that? That these numbers represent, and they're slightly skewed because of your student population, which makes sense, of course. Whenever you see this little box with the red circle with the two light bulbs, these are comments that we've gleaned out of the Mind Mixer site. So they're comments that your citizens have made relative to some of the figures that we're going to be going through.
Clarification that Charlottesville, Columbia, Greenville, McKinney, Nashville, all other college towns, are they included in that comparison to the 9.9%?
Yes, sir, they are. Yeah.
We're lower than other college towns, too.
That's correct.
Well, we have a larger college
I'm not sure about that, but you're probably correct. Yeah.
the largest thing that we have
In the state. Yeah, we knew that, right. I'm from Charlottesville, and I think UVA is a little bit larger than MTSU, but I don't know where it is. So median household income is an important kind of barometer as far as a lot of the franchises that you may want to attract. There were several comments on Mind Mixer as far as what retail outfits they would like to see come to Murfreesboro. But these retail outfits like a Whole Foods or a Costco, they look really seriously at not only median household income, but there are a variety of different demographic kind of statistics that they look at. But so this is an important kind of metric for the kinds of retail and commercial outfits you can expect that will be coming in to Murfreesboro. With regard to Chapter 2, growth, capacity, and infrastructure, and with every summary or preview of each chapter, we have a key considerations section where we're asking questions of ourselves and of your community as well. With regard to growth, capacity, and infrastructure, annexation is a huge one. Right now, based on the numbers and the amount of available land you have within the city limits, we think that you might be able to accommodate all of your projected growth within the city limits, but that remains to be tested. But annexation is an important aspect. Will Tennessee annexation laws affect the community's growth? This is a huge one. We know that the state's annexation laws are somewhat in flux right now. There are a lot of, I'm sure there are a lot of questions you might have that we're not completely clear on, but we will be clear on that over the next several weeks, hopefully. Community definition, number 3. How can the future growth develop in a more compact and regular shape that is cost efficiently served by the city's existing infrastructure and systems and public safety providers? So in some ways, and we'll go over your pattern of annexation here in just a minute, but as your city grows, what we're going to be hoping for, we're hoping that we can develop strategies that can ensure contiguous growth outward. We're going to be also looking at infill and redevelopment scenarios as well. But what we're trying to avoid is leapfrog development and so much sprawl that is very costly to a city. It causes the city to have to extend utilities infrastructure way out. It creates longer response times for your police department and fire department. It might have an impact on your ISO rating, which is extremely high right now, extremely low right now, which is good. So there are a lot of reasons why we want to ensure that growth is contiguous and orderly. Plus, we also want to maintain the integrity and viability of your natural landscapes outside of the city. Solid waste and recycling. One issue that your city has, and Mr. Smith is here to attest to this, but your landfill is going to be running out of space within probably 8 or 9 years, maybe a little bit sooner than that. So is there a way that we can effectively divert certain solid waste out of your landfill, maybe through recycling, maybe other ways, just so we can increase the longevity of your landfill? So that's an important issue because it could impact growth. Just to go over some quick annexation-related numbers, over the last 13 years, the city's annexed a little bit of property, but it's amounted to no more than about 1,000 persons into the community. So you've done very well in building within your city limits. However, I'm going to take you on a little trip beginning, and we picked these numbers. Sorry, I don't know how that got skewed there.
1850.
You can't see the population or the density figures. I'm not sure what happened there. But,
Aaron, you could read. We could just read them for you.
Oh yeah, that's right. I've got it right here. I'm sorry.
Again, the presentation is up on the website. So.
Yeah. Okay. So starting here, this is a period between 1817 and 1850. You can see Murfreesboro. The white is your current city limits. The little green spot was your city's footprint up to 1850. The population of Murfreesboro up to 1850, was 1,917 people, and based on persons per square acre, there was a density of 5.89. So you were a compact little community at that time. The next slide. Between 1850 and 1950, your population increased from 1,900 people to 13,000 people, but your density began to decrease. So now we were at 5.89%. Now we're at 5.35%. So you're starting to spread out a little bit with respect to the land area, your city footprint, compared to how many people are living there. But there are a whole lot of factors that you have to think about as well. The number of public buildings and whatnot, that requires room and that kind of thing. So, but moving on, and there's this little, there was a map of Murfreesboro previously from 1878. That was a Sanborn map. That's for a company that basically cataloged your city's growth from a figure ground perspective. It's a wonderful tool, and actually MTSU has provided us with several years of Sanborn maps, but you can learn a lot from these maps because you can see where certain buildings were, and there's a lot of really interesting notes on these maps about the characteristics of your community that may still be intact or may have been lost over time. The next slide, between 1950 and 1960, your population was just under 19,000 people, 18,991 persons, and your density is continuing to drop. Now you're at 4.51% density. So that's, again, persons per square acre. From 1960 to 1970, your population grew, again, from 19,000 to 26,360 persons. Your density continues to drop. Now you're at 3.5% density. So you're taking up more land per person than you did originally. From 1970 to 1980, you jumped from 26,000 to now a little over 32,000, almost 33,000 persons. Your density now is 2.57%. So again, the footprint's getting larger and larger. More infrastructure, more roads, more public buildings again, but your footprint's getting larger. From 1980 to 1990, your population has now increased from almost 33,000 to 44,922. Your density went from 2.57 to 2.3. But this was also the advent of an interesting municipal ordinance 33-2.1.1 that had a lot to do with the provision of utilities infrastructure to areas where people wanted to be part of the city, but they didn't necessarily have to be contiguous with the city. And so there were some kind of unintended consequences there that we're studying. But you start having pieces of your city that are not contiguous necessarily. From 1990 to 2000, your population has grown from 45,000 to 68,816. Your density is now increasing now up to 2.6%. From 2000 to 2010, you're up to 108,000 people. Density has increased a little bit to 2.9%. And then up to 2014, you're at a population of 117,000, and your density is 3%. So you have, over the last several years, increased in density, but it's still somewhat sprawling. We are interested in, again, how certain laws like Public Chapter 707, Public Chapter 1101, how are these state annexation policies going to impact the city's annexation? So this is the map that will find its way into Chapter 2 that gives you the annexation history, but it won't include the figure to the left, but that figure shows the population change between 2000 and 2014, and you can see that other than McKinney, Texas, which is just growing like crazy, Murfreesboro is really leading the way as far as population growth over the last 14 years. 35,000 people over the last 14 years. That's phenomenal. So now let's talk a little bit about population projections. And we studied a number of different data sources. The Tennessee State Data Center provides population projections for all of the cities within the state. Woods and Pool, this was an organization that does demographic projections it was used by the Rutherford County as well as the Nashville area metropolitan planning organization, principally for transportation purposes. Hazen and Sawyer was used by your city's water and sewer department, basically for a study that was done in 2011. And the study area basically is very similar to your urban growth boundary, and so that's why we use that as well. And then finally, your city's planning department has developed a whole series of projections, 8 different population projections. We looked at the high estimate and low estimate of those projections. But essentially with each projection, it boils down to compound annual growth rate. We looked at the compound annual growth rate as well as the cumulative annual growth rate, the average of that growth rate, not only for the city, but for the planning area, which again is the city plus the urban growth boundary, and then we looked at it for the county as well. So, our estimate is this, essentially, and then we took the midpoint projection from each one of these estimates. So currently, in 2015, Murfreesboro is going to be about 124,745 residents. In 2035, we estimate that the city is going to grow to 228,090 residents. So that's some significant growth. You're going to have some changes as a result of that growth. Within the planning area, again, this is the area within the city limits as well as within the urban growth boundary. We're looking at currently around 202,000 persons population. That is going to expand to 362,388 persons. Rutherford County is going to grow from 309,088 persons in 2015 to 509,910 persons. 200,000 people over the next 20 years or so. So again, this is significant, but at the same time, in a lot of ways it's crystal ball gazing because there are any number of different events could impact these numbers. There are state, regional, national, international events that could totally change the trajectory of these numbers. But at the same time, this is a 20-year planning program, and we want to use these so if we do hit these numbers, you all will be ready to deal with that. You will have the plans in place to address this kind of growth. And again, the whole purpose of this is to maintain your economic well-being as well as your current quality of life as well as your future quality of life. So these are the numbers we're going to be using, and we're going to be making recommendations according to how can you all as a city accommodate this kind of growth. One of the things we're doing, and we're trying to figure out how much of this we're talking about a little bit over 100,000 persons over the next 20 years within the city limits. That is going to require, and this is a cursory estimate, and we're going to be doing a number of kind of scenarios here, but based on a little over 100,000 people, if each person lived on a quarter-acre lot, that's going to mean a little over 9,000 square acres will be required to accommodate just residential growth. Now, of course, you're going to have a whole range of different densities of housing. You're going to have multifamily housing, you're going to have housing that might be on larger lots, on smaller lots. So this is an average for right now, just so we can kind of get a grip on what we're talking about. But you're also going to be needing an additional 481 acres of parks, another very important aspect of your community's infrastructure. So we've got to build that into the equation. But so right now, and this is an ongoing process, and this is just a draft map, but we're looking at somewhere around 16,000 acres remaining of undeveloped land within your city limits. Now granted, some of this land, of course, is zoned industrial. There's other land that is not zoned residential. So, but it gives us a starting point to really understand what are we talking about? How much can we accommodate in the city limits? What are we talking about as far as moving into your urban growth boundary? So again, and this is what we're working on in Chapter 2.
Just for clarification, that 16,000, whatever number, is that city limits only, or is that city limits plus everything?
That is city limits only. And this has been, we're working on this, your former planning director, Joseph Adelot, has been very helpful in providing anecdotal information that we haven't been able to gather. We've been looking at aerial, a lot of this has been done by looking at aerial photographs. So it continues to be tweaked. That number, if anything, it's going to go down, this number. It'll probably go down somewhat. We're doing it actually not only for the city limits, but for the whole urban growth, all the land within your urban growth boundary. And I think we're going to find ultimately that we have precious little land to be dealing with, to be working with. Especially there are a lot of environmental factors that are going to come to play into this. I mean, here's a map, or Shannon, if you could go to the next slide, please. There are, again, a bunch of, we're doing suitability analyses as far as the degree to which your land within the urban growth boundary can accommodate growth. This is a map that just shows all of the sinkholes in the area within the urban growth boundary and the city and just outside of the urban growth boundary. You've got to acknowledge your geology within this area. This is a draft map that just shows your surface water. You may, as a city, want to start thinking in terms of how do we mitigate growth within your 100-year floodplain, just to preserve the health, safety, and welfare of your population. So that's another issue. But with all of these issues, it's subtracting land that's available for development, potentially. This is a draft map that just looks at soil suitability. The pink soils are basically have been determined they're somewhat severe when it comes to infiltration. So that's going to impact how we deal with utilities infrastructure, your wastewater. Moving on to the next chapter, mobility. We're looking at a whole range of things. You know, how can the community expand the city's sidewalk and bicycle network to increase the percentage of residents that can benefit from and use those? So we're looking at, is this something that the community wants to do? And there are a lot of indicators that suggest that we might want to be thinking more in terms of how we can facilitate additional active transportation. Streetscape improvements. Where and in what sequence should the city extend streetscape improvements, sidewalks, lighting, etc., within the city? Metro transit. Can we improve or increase the use of public transportation? Crosstown congestion. This is something we'll talk about here in a moment, but it's significant. 71% of your population, of Murfreesboro's population, works within the county, yet you still have a 25.7 minute commute time. So I think that basically illustrates the amount of congestion you have within the city limits, as per this next slide. The next slide, thank you. So again, here on the right, on your right, you have median commute time to work in minutes, and you can see that or I guess Murfreesboro is about average compared to all the rest of the comparison communities. But also, on your left, the residents that take public transportation to work, while Murfreesboro, only 0.8% of your residents take advantage of public transportation. There are other communities that really do take full advantage of public transportation. But this, as we were talking about today, has an economic development kind of dimension to it, because a lot of communities, or excuse me, a lot of industries and businesses, that's what they're looking at. They want to make sure that you have a robust public transportation system in place so their workers, their potential workers, can be ensured that they can get to work on time and in a reliable fashion. So public transit, while it has a stigma attached to it in some ways, maybe here, that's not necessarily everywhere, but it's also an important aspect to think of when we're talking about economic growth and development. Next slide. Active transportation. We've talked enough about bicycling and walking, but it seems to be a growing interest, especially with your millennial population. You know, a lot of us older folks were used to driving everywhere, but we have a whole population that is more in tune with biking and walking and that kind of thing. People moving here from other cities, that all of this is like a no-brainer to them. So they're used to a certain kind of mode of transportation. Moving on to land use and character. Developer-friendly development climate. How can the city provide more communication and coordination mechanisms to streamline the development review process? We're still looking at this. We don't know if this is necessarily an issue, but one thing that we do want to make sure is that we have business-friendly regulations, but that also ensure, again, predictable development of high quality. Downtown revitalization. How can the community build off what your Main Street program has done, what the Chamber has done, as far as increasing the level of foot traffic, nighttime entertainment, private investment downtown, and more housing options or opportunities. Commercial and residential infill. How can the city promote development or redevelopment of vacant or substandard buildings and properties? One thing we're going to be doing is laying out a method of analyzing potential redevelopable areas within your city limits. Areas where the assessed value of your land might be more valuable than the appraised value of those improvements on the land. This is not something that is going to be a regulation or a requirement, but it could inform a lot of private owners of property that there could be a higher and better use for their land. Quality small and large scale retail opportunities. We're not discouraging big box retail. There's a place for that. You all definitely have a lot of big box retail. What we want to make sure is that there's a finer grain of retail as well that might go with a different density of development. We also have been looking at how you might codify how big box retail might be developed. So when a large retailer that's in a 50,000 or 75,000 square foot building, when they leave, the building is designed in such a way, in more of a modular way, to where it can be broken down into smaller spaces, so you could encourage a range of different retailers to come into that large space, rather than just having to rely on a Walmart or a Target or whatever. So, but we're looking at, and we're doing all sorts of analyses as far as where is the residential growth within the city limits and urban growth boundary, where is your commercial and retail, which of course, next slide please, which of course basically follows a lot of your key transportation corridors. We're looking at housing options, when housing and what types of housing have been built where. And mainly a lot of this information is coming from building permit data, platting, that kind of thing. Regarding housing in neighborhoods, we want to ensure that Murfreesboro is building a diverse series of housing types that will appeal to a range of new people that will be moving into your city. You have a lot of residential housing that is single-family detached. That is certainly appealing for particularly that 33% of your population who are families. But you will be having a lot of single individuals moving into your city to work at some of your industries, other businesses and whatnot. So where are they going to live? What kind of housing are they interested in living in? Neighborhood conservation. We want to make sure that any new development preserves the integrity of your neighborhoods, your nicer neighborhoods. Neighborhood amenities. What are the key elements necessary to make local neighborhoods a success? We've asked a lot of these questions on the Mind Mixer site as well. And of course, we're very interested in infill redevelopment and adaptive reuse, because that's going to be some of your city's cheapest development, in that your infrastructure is already in place. You have your roads, you have your utilities infrastructure, so building on properties that are currently vacant is going to be a lot less expensive for developers and builders than building out on green grass sites outside of the city. We have a number of different figures regarding housing. Interestingly, since 1980, about 72% of your housing has been built since 1980. So you have a fairly young building stock, but it's going to be all aging at the same time. So how is that building stock going to be replaced over time? Looking through here, and we haven't been to Franklin yet. That we wanted to go there this trip, but we haven't been there yet. But you might correct me if I'm wrong. We thought there was a very strong historical kind of component to Henderson, or Franklin, excuse me. But here it's like 81% of Franklin's housing has been built since 1980, so it's even more than Murfreesboro. But you can kind of go through here, and it's very interesting as far as your housing is concerned. One key kind of principle is maintaining affordability for a range of lifestyles that people go through. When you're a student, a college student, you might want to live in a detached dwelling unit behind somebody's house or something like that. You might want to live in an apartment, someplace that doesn't cost that much money and will fulfill all your housing needs while you're going to school. As a single professional, you may want to move into a little bit larger apartment or residence. Then, as a young family, you're going to want to be living in an accommodation that affords the space needed for a family. But then, when your kids grow up and move out, and you're empty nesters, you might want to downsize your property. So, and onward and upward through assisted living, etc. But what we're suggesting is that we want to make sure that all of those housing types are available to your citizens, so they don't have to move somewhere else, that they can live their whole lives within Murfreesboro if they so choose. And that's kind of the key principle of this whole planning program, is to provide as many options as possible to your residents. With respect to affordability, this has to do with housing, but it also has to do with economic development and the amount of disposable income that people have. Murfreesboro is second out of 15 as far as affordability, affordable living. And the way you develop this figure is you take your median home value and you divide it by your median household income. So that creates an affordability index. So when you look at to your right, the median home value is $176,000. So that's really cheap. I mean, you're getting a well-built product, but for much less money than somewhere else. That leaves you that much more money to spend going out to dinner, going to a movie, going to a museum, or wherever you're going to go. So that's a good thing, and we want to make sure that we can kind of maintain that affordability within the community. This is an interesting graph that goes over vacancy, owner occupation, and renter occupation rates. Of course, between 2000 and 2014, we had a major economic downturn. Your vacancy rate, though, in your city, basically it went up in 2010, but now it's dropped down to 7.5. But if you look at all the rest of the comparison communities, they didn't do as well as Murfreesboro did. Your owner-occupied housing, I think you are pretty much average with that, and then your renter-occupied housing, you are, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the numbers, but you're pretty much average with the rest of the comparison communities. It's very important that you do have a large rental housing stock for transient workers coming in to work in industry and that kind of thing. This is an interesting set of figures as well. To your left, educational enrollment. Murfreesboro has the highest percentage of residents in either college or graduate school than any of the other Tennessee cities that we studied. But at the same time, Murfreesboro's educational attainment percentage is actually average compared to all the other communities. So that might lead to a strategy regarding how can we retain a lot of your college students? How can we, instead of MTSU students make up the most of your of Nashville's business employees? How can we turn that around to where we can keep your students here? And that's going to be another way to help grow white-collar jobs in the city. With regard to parks, recreation, and natural resources, again, we're going to be looking at your composition of passive recreation, but also active recreation. Does your city have all of the ball fields and all of the active recreation kind of facilities that it needs for your young people? But do you have passive recreational parks where older people can go and just have a picnic and look at, go bird watching or something like that? Interestingly, and forgive me, I can't remember the name of your park in the very southern end of your city. Barfield, right. There are very few cities where you can go backpacking and camping in the city limits of a city. I think that's so great. So how can we make sure that your city has a network, a balance between passive and active recreation, but also that there's a network that links all of these parks with neighborhoods, with other centers, your schools, that kind of thing. So we're going to be working with Mr. Goodwin on your parks and recreation needs as well. And we want to look at open spaces, not necessarily just that much space that's available for development, but open space is needed for a variety of things, just for space, for example. While on the one hand, we're going to be probably recommending increased densities in some places of your city, but at the same time, we want to make sure that that's balanced with open space elsewhere. Regarding economic development, the next slide, please. Some key considerations. How can we make sure that your business and industrial parks are shovel-ready sites and ready for businesses to move into? How can we increase your community's identity through an effective and robust branding program? How can we grow your white-collar sector as well? So we're going to be looking at a lot of those kind of considerations in the economic development chapter. Here's an interesting statistic, the number of residents that work at home. Surprisingly, Murfreesboro, only 2.2% of your residents work at home. So how can we grow that kind of home-based business element of your economy? Finally, and this is something that we're working on with your task force, and this is not something that you can do overnight, but we want to do it sooner than later so it can inform this comprehensive plan. We're developing a comprehensive vision for the future. That's what is going to be the driver for all of these different plan elements or chapters. So one of the first things we did with your task force was ask them to identify some key words or phrases that might evoke a feeling or a condition or a state of your community 20 years hence. So we're going to be continuing to work on this. With every chapter, we're going to be revisiting the development of a vision statement, and we'll slowly start to piece this thing together and, of course, present it to you. And we're going to also be utilizing the Mind Mixer site to test certain visionary statements. So, bless you. With that, that concludes where we are right now. There's a whole lot more information, but we don't want to wear you out with this stuff. So we certainly appreciate your attention, and as Rob had mentioned, as far as the format of this program, you all are free to leave now, but we also will entertain any questions that you all might have. Some of the questions we might not be able to answer tonight, but we'll get back to you on it. And a lot of the questions or answers we will be posting on the project website, which is
Murfreesboro2035.com.
Murfreesboro2035.com is the project website and the Mind Mixer site. So, very good. With that, thank you very much for the opportunity to work with you all. As Francis mentioned, this is your plan. We are but the facilitators of this plan. So, again, thank you very much.